Donald Trump appears to be troubled this morning as the UN Nation Security Council has convened for an emergency session. Throughout the ongoing meeting, Trump has been highly active online, sharing multiple posts, many of which revised his bogus claims regarding the 2020 election and continued to allege that the results were unfairly taken from him. Well, meanwhile, at the Security Council session, Trump's ambassador to the UN, Michael Waltz, stated that the United States should exert control over the Western Hemisphere. He stated that the intervention in Venezuela was motivated by a desire to access the country's resources, and suggested that the US would extend similar policies throughout the region. Of course, no mention for the UN Charter or the principle of national sovereignty, instead reflecting a stark imperialistic viewpoint. You can hear Michael Waltz discussing remarks in a moment. Typically, in scenarios like this, US allies would voice their support. However, that was not the case this time. The Chinese deputy ambassador called on the United States to follow international law. Watching this Security Council meeting, it is striking to see the US is isolated and cast in a negative light on the world stage. Take a listen.
As Secretary Rubio stated just yesterday, this is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be used as a base of operation for our nation's adversaries and competitors and rivals of the United States. You can't turn Venezuela into the operating hub for Iran, for Hezbollah, for gangs, for Cuban intelligence agents, and other malign actors that control that country. You cannot continue to have the largest energy reserves in the world under the control of adversaries of the United States, under the control of illegitimate leaders, and not benefiting the people of Venezuela, and stolen by a handful of oligarchs inside of Venezuela.
The United States representative to the United Nations, Michael Waltz, continues that there was no active war against Venezuela. He described the situation as a law enforcement action rather than a military conflict, questioning why so many people referring to it as a war. Here, play the clip.
The United States successfully carried out a surgical law enforcement operation facilitated by the U.S. military against two indicted fugitives of American justice, narco-terrorist Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores. Colleagues, Nicolas Maduro is responsible for attacks on the people of the United States, for destabilizing the Western Hemisphere, and illegitimately repressing the people of Venezuela. As Secretary Rubio has said, there is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades. The United States arrested a narco trafficker who is now going to stand trial in the United States in accordance with the rule of law for the crimes he's committed against our people for 15 years. A similar action was taken in 1989 against Manuel Noriega.
Subsequently, the United States faced widespread criticism from countries such as China, Russia, and Denmark. When actions like those occur, the ability to claim moral authority is lost. The situation provided Russia and China with a platform to publicly rebuke the United States for disrupting global stability. As a result of this controversial intervention, specifically referring Donald Trump's involvement in Venezuela, the United States was accused of violating international norms. In response, Chinese Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations expressed profound shock and condemned the unilateral move by the United States.
On January the 3rd, the United States blatantly launched large-scale military strikes against Venezuela, forcibly seized Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and took them out of the country. It claimed that it will run Venezuela and even didn't rule out launching a second round of military operations on an even larger scale. China is deeply shocked by and strongly condemns the unilateral, illegal, and bullying acts of the U.S. For some time now, the international community has repeatedly expressed grave concern over the U.S. sanctions, blockade, and threats of force against Venezuela. The Council convened 2 emergency meetings, during which Secretary General Guterres, many Council members, and countries in the region and beyond unanimously called for abiding by the UN Charter and the international law, maintaining calm and restraint, resolving disputes peacefully, de-escalating tensions, and safeguarding regional stability. However, as a permanent member of the Council, the U.S. has disregarded the grave concerns of the international community, wantonly trampled upon Venezuela's sovereignty, security, and legitimate rights and interests, and seriously violated the principles of sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, peaceful settlement of international disputes, and the prohibition of the use of force in international relations. These principles constitute the fundamental tenets of the UN Charter and form the cornerstone of maintaining international peace and security in Latin America and the Caribbean, and indeed internationally. China firmly opposes this, and the international community has also expressed widespread grave concern and strong condemnation. We urge the U.S. to heed the overwhelming voice of the international community, abide by international law and the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, cease infringing upon the sovereignty and security of other countries, stop toppling the government of Venezuela, and return to the path of political solutions through dialogue and negotiations. We call on the U.S. to ensure the personal safety of President Maduro and his wife and to release them at once. We support the Council in fulfilling its primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, and we support all efforts by the UN Secretary General, regional countries, and organizations that contribute to promoting dialogue and de-escalating the situation. President, the lessons of history are a stark warning. Military means are not the solution to problems, and the indiscriminate use of force will only lead to greater crisis.
The Danish ambassador addressed the audience, delivering a speech that was particularly significant given the recent developments. Trump has been making ongoing statements suggesting that Greenland could be his next focus, mentioning countries like Cuba, Greenland, Colombia, and even Canada in his remarks. This echoes his long-standing reference to the idea of adding a 51st state, but more recently he has claimed that Greenland might be acquired within the next few months. As Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, the ambassador's response was especially relevant. Here, watch that clip.
Denmark recalls the foundational principle of international law that forbids states from threatening or using force against another state's territorial integrity and political independence. This imperative is enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Members of the UN Security Council have a special responsibility to uphold these principles. The principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity must be respected. The inviolability of borders is not up for negotiation. These are universal, sacrosanct principles enshrined in international law. They apply everywhere.
The Russian ambassador strongly criticized the United States on the international standards the US often promotes. He pointed out that those are the same principles America has consistently advocated to others, questioning the effectiveness of their approach. The ambassador sarcastically congratulated the global community, suggesting perhaps a new method should be considered, as those circumstances now allow Russia to challenge the existing narrative. The Russian ambassador strongly criticized the United States, questioning the legitimacy of so-called rule-based orders that the US so often promote. He talked about how the US has set those standards and implied that perhaps a different approach should be considered, as American credibility is challenged.
Depending upon the political landscape. Today, we are reaping the consequences of their recklessness and selectivity in matters related to respect for the norms of international law, which were linked to the so-called rules-based world order. Here is your rules-based world order in all of its glory, which is of aggression due to a fear of angering the American global gendarme, which is attempting to once again rear its head. We are particularly appalled by the unparalleled cynicism with which Washington did not even attempt to conceal the true aims of its criminal operation, namely the establishment of unbridled control over Venezuela's natural resources and the assertion of their hegemonical ambitions in Latin America. In this way, Washington is generating freshmen. There is no and can be no justification for the crimes cynically perpetrated by the United States in Caracas. We firmly condemn the U.S. act of armed aggression against Venezuela in breach of all international legal norms. In connection with the confirmed reports about the presence of the abducted president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his spouse in the United States, today, as we are aware, they are in New York. We call upon, corrects the speaker, the U.S. leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of an independent state and his spouse. Any problems existing or conflict between the United States and Venezuela need to be resolved through dialogue. And this is precisely what is enshrined in the UN Charter, for purposes and the principles of which a number of states in recent years have begun to.
Following this, a representative from the United Nations, Under-Secretary Rosemarie DiCarlo, delivered a message on behalf of Secretary General Antonio Guterres during the Security Council session, focused on Venezuela. In her remark, she conveyed the Secretary General's significant concern regarding alleged breaches of international law by the United States, as well as issues related to the UN Charter. Take a listen.
I remain deeply concerned that rules of international law have not been respected with regard to the 3 January military action. The Charter enshrines the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The maintenance of international peace and security depends on the continued commitment of all member states to adhere to all the provisions of the Charter. Mr. President, Venezuela has experienced decades of internal instability and social and economic turmoil. Democracy has been undermined. Millions of its people have fled the country. The situation is critical, but it is still possible to prevent a wider and more destructive conflagration. I call on all Venezuelan actors to engage in an inclusive, democratic dialogue in which all sectors of society can determine their future. This entails the full respect of human rights, the rule of law, and the sovereign will of the Venezuelan people. I also urge Venezuela's neighbors and the international community more broadly to act in a spirit of solidarity and in adherence to the principles, laws, and rules erected to promote peaceful coexistence. I welcome and am ready to support all efforts aimed at assisting Venezuelans in finding a peaceful way forward. Mr. President, Excellencies, in situations as confused as complex as the one we now face, it is important to stick to principles. Respect for the UN Charter and all other applicable legal frameworks to safeguard peace and security. Respect for the principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of states. The prohibition of the threat or use of force. The power of the law must prevail. International law contains tools to address issues such as illicit traffic in narcotics, disputes about resources, and human rights concerns. This is the route we need to take.
MAGA Republican Congress member Scott Fitzgerald stated that the military event in Venezuela was not an invasion, but rather a law enforcement operation. We heard that before. He drew parallels to actions taken by Teddy Roosevelt. Imagine that. Yes, guys, the US has heard strong words at this UN emergency meeting today. And the US, not surprisingly, was totally alone. No ally, no friends. I have a feeling that this is a very strong precursor of what is to come. The future of the US shrinking in isolation. So you guys, thanks for watching. I'm Wilfried Lemkuller from Europe Curious.